Hello, YouTubers, and welcome to Level-Headed News. This is your host, Brenda. I have 6 articles in this episode for you. Else are in the description of this video for your convenience. The first one here is off the hill. It says, Putin spokesman relations may now than the Cold War. The relationship between the U.S. and Russia is antagonistic now than it was during decades-long. Russian President Vladimir Putin said on Friday. BBC's Good Morning America host George Stephanopoulos and Russia were in Cold War. Peskov said the current situation may be worse, blaming the U.S. for disintegrating cooperation between the two countries. Or, well, maybe even worse. The count actions of the present presidential administration in Washington, Peskov told Stephanopoulos. The decision to expel 35 Russian diplomats from the U.S. in December, which was made under former President Obama and not President Trump. The relationship between Trump and Russia has been the subject of intense scrutiny since before the real estate mogul took office in January. This committee unanimously concluded late last year the election to help Trump, and he has spoken warmly of Putin's desire to improve U.S.-Russian relations. The House and Senate Intelligence Committee are conducting a probe of Russian election meddling, as well as Trump and his aides' ties to Moscow. The FBI is also investigating. Russia sought to interfere in the presidential election and has blamed the accusations on anti-Russian sentiment in the U.S., but intelligence officials have warned that the Kremlin is likely to try to meddle in other upcoming elections across Western Europe. The article that I have for you, libertyheadlines.com. U.S. House votes to label North Korea as sponsor of terrorism. U.S. House of Representatives voted to label North Korea as a state sponsor of terrorism amid rising tensions over the nation's nuclear weapons program. The legislation, which overwhelmingly passed by a 394-to-1 vote, State Department to list the Hermit Kingdom alongside other nations, including Iran, Syria. It's high time we call out Little Kim and loose cannon, or the loose cannon of East Asia, for what he is, a terrorist in a terrorist state, said Representative Ted Poe, Republican of Texas, the bill's author. State Rex Tillerson will be tasked with accepting or rejecting the designation within 90 days of the bill becoming a law. North Korea was removed from the list in 2008 as part of an agreement with the Bush administration that called on the country to limit its nuclear weapons program. A matter of if, but when Kim Jong-un will be brazen enough to attack one of our allies or even the United States, Kevin McCarthy said. Only by calling our adversaries what they are, so they know that America will be steadfast in its defense of freedom and liberty, realistic hope of maintaining peace. The next article is off of debatepost.com. Post says Canadian ISIS supporters have the right to defend their freedom. Several staff of the Trudeau International Airport in Montreal lost their security clearance due to radicalization and support for the Islamic State. ISIS has influenced many people to be stripped from their security clearance while working at a major Canadian airport. Justin Trudeau's father, Pierre Elliott Trudeau, is a bad thing, something that could lead to disaster and major safety issues for Canada. Employees had access to the runway directly. The investigation found that videos of ISIS shared and promoted from the social media accounts. The radicalized employee, who still works there, or taken into custody. He's been given a new job at the same airport, but this time he can't get access to the runway. Is that justified? Canada feels safe now. Justin Trudeau responded to the story and said everyone has the right to their freedom. I think that's part of the kind of conversations we have to have as a society, Trudeau said. People safe is paramount and important, but defending our rights and freedoms as well, and making sure we do that in the right way. Can't make this stuff up. Trudeau wants to have national conversation about whether terrorist sympathizers and ISIS supporters should be able to work in strategic locations at our national airports. He wants us to consider the rights and freedoms of terrorist sympathizers in order to strike the right balance between our safety and their freedom to do what? Support jihad? Parody of an apologetic leftist who believes terrorism is our fault and zealots and jihadists are simply misunderstood. We've seen this sort of weak-kneed response from Trudeau before in his early days in politics. Mainstream says there's a Trump-style right-wing conservative movement increase in Canada, and Trudeau is the one that triggers promising the protection Canadians want. Some polls suggest Trudeau as more time goes by, but slow but steady. And up at the next election and make their votes count? The next article I have is off of Natural News. 16 countries in the EU vote against GM crops as GMO backlash sweeps the globe. The month of March came to an end. The majority of European Union members voted against a proposal that would bring in two types of genetically modified maize. 16 members of the EU took a stand against the introduction of the new GMO crops, but will that be enough to keep them out of Europe? The two new varieties of maize include DuPont's Pioneers 1507 and Syngenta's BT11. Kill insects by producing their own pesticides and are resistant to Bayer's glyphosate herbicide. I think it's glyphosate. If they are approved, reports that they will be the first new GMO crops approved for cultivation since 1998, nearly 20 years ago. The majority of EU voted against the approval of these GMO varieties. It appears that simplicity is not enough to keep them out. The votes because the opposition did not include a qualified majority, which is defined as including countries that make up at least 65% of the EU. Monsanto's GM corn variety 10 was also up for debate, as the EU voted on whether or not GM crops license should be reviewed. I guess it is. Mon 810 is currently the only genetically modified crop that is cultivated in the EU. Rarely grown in Spain and Portugal. Less than 1% of the farmland in the EU is dedicated to cultivating Monsanto's GM corn. However, in total, 19 nations of the EU have banned Mon 810 entirely. Overall, most of the EU has traditionally expressed opposition towards GM crops, and all EU nations require labeling of GM foods. As Friends of the Earth reportedly explains, of these three GM crops now reside in the hands of European Commission. Head of the organization is no doubt feeling the pressure to reject the GMO corn varieties continues to grow louder. Mute campaigner for Friends of the Earth Europe, bold whether he likes it or not, the buck now stops at Jean-Claude Juncker. He can put himself on the side of majority countries, citizens and farmers who do not want genetically modified crops, or he can back the mega corporations behind the industrialization of our countryside. According to Greenpeace EU, even if the three crops gain approval, they will not be commonly grown. The approval would only be valid in 9 of the 28 EU countries, along with 3 regions. Flanders and the Brussels region of Belgium and England, the remaining 19 countries and regions of the EU have chosen to opt out and prevent GMO crops within their borders. GMO crop cultivation can be of great concern, however. Friends of the Earth Europe is calling upon Juncker to take a stand against corporate interests and do what's right for the people of Europe by denying approval to concoctions that the biotech industry tries to pass off as crops. Or public support for genetically modified crops. Farmers don't even want them. President Juncker to pull the plug once and for all and to focus on how we can make farming resilient to climate change, save family farms, and stop the destruction of nature, countryside to genetically modified crops and move on, Schimpf proclaimed in a recent statement. Here in this, when it talks about GMO crops, it tells you these kill insects by producing their own pesticides. Assume that? Are you kidding me? Thinks that that's a good idea? Assume it. Our livestock does. To eat livestock. Do you like your beef? You like your pork? Lamb? This stuff. So what they eat is what they produce. Wow. People think that that's a good idea. The next one we have here is off of express.co.uk, and it says EU ultimatum. Brussels tells Poland and Hungary or leave the bloc. Host of EU countries, Poland and Hungary, accept their quota of migrants or they will face being booted out of the crumbling bloc. What a threat. Oh, both countries have ignored EU's proposals to relocate 160,000 migrants, and the rest of the bloc is set to take action to ensure they share the burden. Ignored criticism from the European Commission over its handling of the migrant crisis, and last week, Cedio, minister, criticized EU plans for two-speed Europe, which would allow more powerful members to develop faster neighbors. Meanwhile, Hungary has pushed back against the centralization of powers in Brussels, and leader Viktor Orban called for the country's borders to be closed during the height of the 2015 migrant crisis. The two countries will now have to decide if they are willing to maintain their anti-rhetoric if it puts their EU membership under threat, a diplomatic source told the Times. The source said they will have to make a choice in the European system or not. You cannot blackmail the EU. Unity has a price. The European Court of Justice, the ECJ, is expected to look into the legality of the migrant quotas, with a judgment widely expected to be in favor of them due year. The source added, "We are confident the ECJ will confirm validation. Poland and Hungary must abide by the decision. If they don't, then they will face consequences, both financial and political. No more opt-outs. There's no more and 1 foot out. We're going to be very tough on this. The EU's migrant quotas have been widely criticized for being ineffective, with members, including Slovakia and the Czech Republic, between the EU, Hungary, and Poland to be resolved their share of migrants. Germany, France, and Italy have called for a permanent system of quotas to replace the emergency measures currently in place, which would include fines and penalties. Fly. You don't even want to know what I'm thinking about that. The next one is off of BizPack Review. Theresa May ready to go to war with Spain over Brexit issue. Assuming Brexit has sparked a diplomatic feud between the United Kingdom and Spain over the tiny territory of Gibraltar. Conservative leader Michael Howard said Prime Minister Theresa May is ready to go to war to defend Gibraltar's, similar to how Margaret Thatcher battled Argentine forces on the Falkland Islands in the 1980s. Gibraltar is internationally recognized as a British overseas territory, but Spain has contested the Brits' legal claim to the region for hundreds of years. So this week, another woman, prime minister, sent a task force halfway across the world to defend the freedom of another small group of British people against another Spanish-speaking country. Led the Conservatives between 2003 and 2005, told Sky News on Sunday. It's certain that our current prime minister would show the same resolve in standing by the people of Gibraltar. Defense Minister Michael Fallon backed Howard's claim, saying the government will go all the way to protect Gibraltar. Alfonso Destis, the Spanish foreign minister, responded by saying his country would not block a Scottish membership in the European Union. 30,000 residents in Gibraltar consider the idea of living under Spanish rule absolutely awful, according to Chief Minister Fabian Picardo. The UK goes to war over the principle of consent around the world, and the people of Gibraltar have expressed their views to what they think the sovereignty of Gibraltar should be, and freely, Picardo told Sky News. I have for you in this episode. If you like what I'm doing here, give it a thumbs up. Share it on your social media so everybody gets to hear the news. Subscribe if you haven't done that yet. Stay informed. See you in the next one.